In 1560, a 19-year-old hostage named Matsudaira Takechiyo stood on a battlefield watching his master die. Imagawa Yoshimoto, the warlord who had held him captive since childhood, who controlled his family, who owned his future, lay butchered in a surprise attack. Around him, the Imagawa army collapsed into chaos. Samurai who had seemed invincible that morning now fled like scattered leaf zombies. Takechiyo had a choice: run with the defeated and remain a footnote, or disappear into the smoke of history and become someone else entirely. He chose patience. 43 years later, that hostage would die as Tokugawa Ieyasu, undisputed ruler of all Japan, founder of a dynasty that would endure 2.5 centuries. But the path between captivity and absolute power was not paved with battlefield glory or noble conquest. It was built on waiting, on silence, on watching ambitious men destroy themselves while he smiled and bowed and survived. To understand a Tokugawa Ieyasu, you must first understand what it means to be a prisoner who is not called a prisoner. Born into a minor provincial family, Takechiyo was handed over as a hostage at age 6, insurance to guarantee his father's loyalty to a more powerful clan. Then his father switched sides, making the boy worthless to his captors and irrelevant to his own family. For the next 13 years, he lived in gilded captivity, not abused but owned. Not tortured, but reminded daily that his life was a bargaining chip in games played by men who barely remembered his name. Most hostages break under this treatment. They become hollow, bitter, desperate for any scrap of agency. Ieyasu became something else, a student of patience. He watched how power moved through a daimyo's court, who commanded genuine loyalty and who purchased it, which alliances were built on fear and which on shared interest. How ambitious men telegraphed their moves long before they acted. He learned that the man who speaks first often regrets it, that the advisor who agrees too quickly is planning betrayal, that true power lies not in making declarations, but in making others believe their ideas were their own. When Imagawa Yoshimoto died and chaos consumed the clan structure, Ieyasu simply walked away. No dramatic escape, no rebellion. He waited until everyone was too busy surviving to notice him leaving, then returned to his father's former domain and quietly took control. He was 21 years old. Already he understood something his rivals would take decades to learn. In a world of ambitious predators, the patient man chooses which corpse to feed upon. The Sengoku period was defined by betrayal, fathers murdered by sons, brothers turning on brothers, alliances that lasted one season before dissolving into blood. Into this landscape of treachery, Ieyasu formed an alliance that would define Japanese history, his partnership with Oda Nobunaga, the most ruthless warlord of the age. Nobunaga was everything Ieyasu was not. Impulsive, brutal, innovative, terrifying. He burned monasteries filled with warrior monks, executed entire families for disloyalty, introduced firearms to traditional warfare, and laughed while his enemies died screaming. But Nobunaga recognized something in the quiet young daimyo from Mikawa province. Where other vassals schemed and postured, Ieyasu simply delivered. Promised troops? They arrived on time. Promised supplies? They materialized. Promised loyalty? It never wavered. This was Ieyasu's genius. He understood that in an era of constant betrayal, reliability itself became a weapon. While other daimyo plotted elaborate treacheries, Ieyasu became indispensable through simple consistency. Nobunaga rewarded this loyalty by granting Ieyasu independence and expansion rights. But more importantly, he provided something invaluable: a front row seat to watch the most brilliant military mind in Japan conquer through pure force of will. Ieyasu absorbed every lesson: how Nobunaga handled dissent, how he motivated armies, how he turned enemies against each other, and, most critically, what mistakes cost Nobunaga his life. In 1582, Nobunaga was betrayed and killed by one of his own generals at Honnoji Temple. The news reached Ieyasu while he was traveling in dangerous territory with only a small guard. Most men would have panicked, rushed home, made themselves visible targets. Ieyasu vanished, moved through enemy provinces in disguise, arrived home quietly, consolidated his forces, and waited to see who would win the succession struggle. The answer was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's greatest general, a man of peasant birth who had risen through tactical genius and ruthless ambition. When Hideyoshi emerged victorious and began unifying Japan under his banner, Ieyasu faced a choice: resist and likely perish, or submit and preserve his strength for another day. He submitted, bowed deeply, offered hostages, including his own son, and waited. For 13 years, Tokugawa Ieyasu served Toyotomi Hideyoshi, fought his battles, attended his councils, bowed at his ceremonies, and secretly built the foundation of an empire. While Hideyoshi dreamed of conquering Korea and China, launching catastrophic invasions that drained resources and destroyed armies, Ieyasu accepted modest territorial expansions in eastern Japan, provinces that seemed less glamorous than those granted to more favored generals. But Ieyasu saw what others missed. He was being given the Kanto region, including a fishing village called Edo, isolated from Kyoto's politics, far from Hideyoshi's direct scrutiny, rich in agricultural potential and positioned to control northern trade routes. While other daimyo fought for glory in Korea, Ieyasu built infrastructure, roads, irrigation systems, fortifications. He recruited administrators, not just warriors, established supply chains, created systems. He was building something Hideyoshi never understood. Not just an army, but a functioning state. When Hideyoshi's invasions failed and tens of thousands of samurai died for nothing, the great unifier's reputation cracked. When he executed his own nephew and ordered his trusted advisor to commit suicide over paranoid suspicions, the cracks widened. And when Hideyoshi died in 1598, leaving only a 5-year-old son to inherit his legacy, the structure he had built began to collapse. Hideyoshi had tried to secure his legacy through a council of 5 regents, the most powerful daimyo, sworn to protect his son until he came of age. Ieyasu was the eldest among them. The other regents expected him to honor that oath. They believed, after decades of submission, that Tokugawa Ieyasu knew his place. They had forgotten what he learned as a hostage. Survival requires patience. Power requires timing. And oaths are only as strong as the men who enforce them. Within 2 years, Ieyasu had maneuvered Japan towards civil war, not through open declaration, but through careful political marriages, strategic land grants, and allowing his rivals to reveal their intentions first. He divided the other regions, made alliances that seemed defensive, but were actually offensive, and positioned himself as the reasonable alternative to chaos. By 1600, Japan had split into 2 camps, those loyal to Hideyoshi's heir, led by Ishida Mitsunari, and those who had chosen survival over sentiment, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. The confrontation would come at a place called Sekigahara, October 21st, 1600. Dawn breaks over a valley in central Japan, where 160,000 samurai face each other across morning fog. On paper, Ieyasu is outnumbered. Ishida Mitsunari commands more troops and holds strategic positions. But numbers tell only part of the story. For months, Ieyasu has been doing what he does best, waiting, watching, and making promises. Secret negotiations with commanders in Ishida's army, assurances of land and position if they switch sides at the right moment. Nothing written, nothing proven, just whispered possibilities. The battle begins brutally. Thousands die in the opening clashes. For hours, the outcome seems genuinely uncertain. Ieyasu's forces hold but cannot advance. Ishida's armies press but cannot break through. Then, at the critical moment, entire units in Ishida's formation simply stop fighting. Commanders who had promised loyalty to Hideyoshi's heir instead watch their allies die. Some actively turn their weapons on their former comrades. The betrayal is devastating and decisive. What seemed like Ishida's numerical advantage becomes a catastrophic collapse. By afternoon, his army is destroyed. By evening, he is captured. Sekigahara is often called the most important battle in Japanese history, but it was not won through tactical brilliance or superior fighting. It was won through patience, negotiation, and the understanding that loyalty in wartime is simply fear and self-interest dressed in honor's clothing. Ieyasu executes Ishida Mitsunari and the most vocal supporters of Hideyoshi's heir. But he does not slaughter the defeated wholesale. Instead, he redistributes territories carefully, rewarding those who switched sides, punishing those who resisted, but leaving enough survivors to govern a country that needs stability more than revenge. 3 years later, the emperor grants Tokugawa Ieyasu the title of Shogun, military dictator of all Japan. The hostage who had no future now controlled every future in the archipelago. Becoming shogun solved nothing. Power seized must then be maintained, and maintenance requires different skills than conquest. Ieyasu understood this better than any of his predecessors. Nobunaga had seized power through violence and died violently. Hideyoshi had unified Japan through charisma and watched it fracture the moment he weakened. Ieyasu would not repeat their mistakes. He built a system, not just a government, but an architecture of control so elegant that it would outlast him by 2.5 centuries. First, the Sankin Kotai system. Every daimyo must maintain a residence in Edo and spend alternating years serving the shogun personally. When they return to their provinces, their families remain in Edo as guests, hostages in everything but name. Ieyasu had learned as a child how captivity controls behavior. Now he applied that lesson to an entire nation's nobility. Second, he redistributed territories strategically. Loyal allies received lands near Edo. Former enemies were given distant provinces, surrounded by allies who would report any suspicious activity. The geography itself became a surveillance system. Third, he restricted foreign contact and controlled weapons. Christianity, which Hideyoshi had tried to eradicate, was systematically eliminated, not through mass persecution initially, but through pressure, restriction, and the patient removal of foreign priests. Firearms were regulated, ensuring no daimyo could arm a peasant rebellion. Most brilliantly, he created a rigid class system: samurai, peasants, artisans, merchants, each locked into their role. Mobility between classes became nearly impossible. A society frozen in place is a society that cannot organize revolution. But Ieyasu knew systems alone were insufficient. Systems can be dismantled by the wrong successor. So he did something remarkable. He retired. In 1605, just 2 years after becoming shogun, Ieyasu passed the title to his son Hidetada, not because he was weak or tired, but because he wanted to establish the precedent that the Tokugawa bloodline, not individual capability, determined succession. He remained the true power, of course, made the critical decisions, approved all major policies, but officially the system continued without him at its center. This was his final lesson. True power is not what you hold, but what survives your death. In 1615, the last threat to Tokugawa dominance was eliminated when Ieyasu's forces destroyed the remnants of the Toyotomi clan at Osaka Castle. Hideyoshi's bloodline ended in fire and blood just 17 years after the great unifier's death. Ieyasu died the following year, in 1616 at age 73. By then, the system he had built was already operating independently. The Tokugawa shogunate would govern Japan until 1868, 253 years of relative peace in a land that had known only war for centuries. History remembers Tokugawa Ieyasu as the unifier who brought peace to Japan. Temples were built in his honor. His legacy was celebrated for centuries. The Edo period became synonymous with stability, culture, and prosperity. But we should not mistake stability for benevolence. The peace Ieyasu created was the peace of the prison, a society so rigidly controlled that innovation stagnated, where class determined destiny before birth, where contact with the outside world was forbidden, where the smallest deviation from prescribed behavior could result in execution of entire families. He achieved what Nobunaga's brutality and Hideyoshi's charisma could not, a Japan that would remain unchanged for centuries. But unchanged means unmoved, static, frozen. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853 and forced Japan to open to the world, the Tokugawa system collapsed within 15 years. The architecture of control that had seemed eternal proved to be a structure built for a world that no longer existed. Ieyasu won by being patient, by outlasting his enemies, by building systems instead of monuments to his own glory. In this, he succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. But there is a question worth asking. Is a peace built on control truly peace? Is a stability that requires 3 centuries of frozen hierarchy and forbidden contact with the outside world actually an achievement, or merely the most sophisticated prison ever constructed? Ieyasu learned patience in captivity and used it to rule a nation. But in making patience his weapon, did he not simply recreate his childhood prison on a national scale, transforming an entire civilization into hostages who were not called hostages? The man who survived by waiting built a country that was never allowed to move forward. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Tokugawa Ieyasu. You can win by patience. You can build a legacy that endures centuries. But if what you build cannot adapt, cannot change, cannot grow, then you have not created an empire. You have simply built a more elaborate cage. What do you think? Can any system of control, no matter how stable, truly endure forever? Or does patience, the virtue that brought Ieyasu to power, become a curse when applied to an entire nation? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to explore more dark truths about history's most calculating rulers, subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles, because every piece has a price, and sometimes that price is paid centuries later.